She was going to prison. In 48 hours, Simone Hayes would be arrested for crimes she didn't commit. Federal charges. Fraud. The kind that destroy you permanently. The kind that take your freedom and never give it back. And the man who'd orchestrated it all? He was sleeping 2 floors above her right now. The billionaire she'd once loved. The man who'd promised forever, then vanished from her life. He was back. And he'd just decided to erase her completely. She didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that in a few hours, someone would show her something that would make her question everything about her life, about him, about the price of secrets. All she knew was that her time was running out. Welcome back to Mr. Harrington's Stories. I'm your host, and before we go deeper into this nightmare, I want to start with a blessing for you. May truth find you before lies destroy you. May you have the strength to face what's real, even when it breaks your heart. And may you never stop fighting for justice, no matter the cost. Type present in the comments right now. Let me know you're here, ready to witness a story that will change everything you thought you knew about power, love, and secrets. If you believe people should be treated fairly, if you believe the truth should matter more than money and status, then hit subscribe. I'm building a community of people who care about real justice. The trolls won't be here. But you will. Now let's go back to the beginning. Let's understand how a nurse and a billionaire created a secret so powerful it would shake his entire empire. She was going to prison. In 48 hours, Simone Hayes would be arrested for crimes she didn't commit. Federal charges. Fraud. The kind that destroy you permanently. The kind that take your freedom and never give it back. And the man who'd orchestrated it all? He was sleeping 2 floors above her right now. The billionaire she'd once loved. The man who'd promised forever, then vanished from her life. He was back. And he'd just decided to erase her completely. She didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that in a few hours, someone would show her something that would make her question everything about her life, about him, about the price of secrets. All she knew was that her time was running out. Welcome back to Mr. Harrington's Stories. I'm your host, and before we go deeper into this nightmare, I want to start with a blessing for you. May truth find you before lies destroy you. May you have the strength to face what's real, even when it breaks your heart. And may you never stop fighting for justice, no matter the cost. Type present in the comments right now. Let me know you're here, ready to witness a story that will change everything you thought you knew about power, love, and secrets. If you believe people should be treated fairly, if you believe the truth should matter more than money and status, then hit subscribe. I'm building a community of people who care about real justice. The trolls won't be here. But you will. Now let's go back to the beginning. Let's understand how a nurse and a billionaire created a secret so powerful it would shake his entire empire. Simone Hayes had become a master of invisibility. She moved through the Sinclair penthouse like a ghost. Not seen, not heard, not remembered. At 34 years old, with mahogany skin that caught the light under expensive chandeliers, she cleaned marble floors that cost more than most people's annual salary. She polished crystal glasses. She folded cashmere sweaters that she would never own. She existed in the margins of billionaire excess, earning $45,000 a year to disappear into the background of a life that wasn't hers. The penthouse was her prison and her purgatory all at once. 50 stories above Manhattan, surrounded by art and wealth and everything money could buy, Simone scrubbed and organized and cared for 2 children who didn't know her name. Not really. To them, she was just the help. The woman in the white uniform who made their lunches and braided their hair and tucked them into beds that probably cost more than her entire apartment. Nobody in that penthouse knew her real story. Not the chef who prepared meals she'd never taste. Not the personal assistants who rushed past her in the hallways. Certainly not the woman who'd replaced her in his bed, the one sleeping in rooms Simone had once dared to dream about. But Simone had secrets. Stacks of them, piled as high as the money in Alexander Sinclair's bank accounts. And in 48 hours, those secrets would cost her everything. To understand how we got here, we have to go back. 7 years back. To a moment when Simone Hayes was still a different person. A woman who believed in love, who believed in second chances, who believed that some connections transcended the gap between the ordinary and the extraordinary. She was a registered nurse at Westchester Medical Center back then. Double shifts. 12 hours on her feet, saving lives, comforting the dying, holding the hands of people at their most vulnerable moments. It was exhausting work, meaningful work, the kind that emptied your soul but made you feel like you were part of something larger than yourself. She was beautiful then. She's beautiful now, but back then, her smile reached her eyes. There was light in her. Hope. The kind of hope that only exists before the world teaches you better. It was a rainy October night when he came through those hospital doors. Alexander Sinclair. A gashed forehead from a car accident. Something minor, something that would have been forgotten by morning if not for the man attached to it. He moved through the emergency room like he owned it, like the normal rules of waiting and patience didn't apply to him. Because they didn't. Money has a way of bending reality. She was assigned to stitch him up. 3 words into his apology, Simone knew she was in trouble. He was charming in that particular way that only wealthy men can be, the kind of charm that comes from never being told no. He was brilliant. Dangerous with the kind of wealth that made ordinary rules seem not just quaint but irrelevant. He asked for her number before she'd even finished bandaging his forehead. She should have said no. Her mother had warned her about men like him. But Simone had never been good at protecting her own heart. What followed was 90 days that felt like a lifetime. 5-star hotels overlooking Central Park. Stolen moments in the spaces between his obligations. Whispered promises in the dark. He told her she was different from the women in his world. He said he'd never felt this way before. He kissed her like he meant it, and for 90 days, she believed him. Then came the wedding announcement. Victoria Ashford. Old money. An older family. Appropriate in every way that Simone could never be. Alexander didn't even call to tell her. She read about it in the New York Times Society pages. A small photograph of him smiling at a woman in a white dress, and her heart simply stopped beating for a moment. He didn't call. He didn't explain. He didn't say goodbye. He just vanished. Like those 90 days had been a dream. Or worse, like a mistake he was determined to forget. 3 months later, Simone discovered she was pregnant. Not with 1 baby. With 2. She sat in a clinic in Queens, staring at an ultrasound screen while a nurse pointed to 2 separate heartbeats. 2 tiny lives, both with his eyes, both waiting to enter a world that would never know they were his. Her entire universe reorganized itself in that moment. Everything she thought she knew about her future, about her life, about what came next, all of it shattered and reformed into something she didn't recognize. She tried calling him. 3 times. His number had changed. She reached out through a mutual friend, and the response came back with a kind of cruelty that only money can afford. He didn't want to know. So Simone made an impossible choice. She carried those twins alone. Through the pregnancy, through the labor, through the sleepless nights that turned into sleepless years. She raised Marcus and Noah in a studio apartment in Jackson Heights, working minimum wage jobs, fighting every single day to give them what they needed. Marcus had his father's jawline. Noah inherited his father's intelligence. And Simone carried a secret that ate her alive every single day. Nobody knew. Not her mother. Not her best friend. Not even the children themselves. As far as the world was concerned, Simone Hayes was a single mother with twins whose father had died in a car accident. It was the only story she could bear to tell, the only version of her life that didn't expose the wound underneath. But secrets have a way of catching up with you. They simmer beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when your guard is down. Waiting for the moment when you're desperate enough to make a choice you never thought you'd make. 18 months ago, Simone's life fractured again. She was working at a cleaning service, making $15 an hour, when she got a call from a recruiting agency. A wealthy family in Manhattan needed a live-in housekeeper and nanny. The pay was 5 times what she was currently making. Benefits included a private room in a penthouse apartment. She should have said no. She should have run the other way and never looked back. But Marcus needed braces. Noah needed tutoring. The apartment's roof was leaking, and winter was coming. And if she was being honest with herself, if she dared to peek at the part of her heart she'd sealed off years ago, she wanted to see him again. She wanted him to see who she'd become. She wanted him to know what he'd lost when he threw her away. On a Tuesday morning in March, Simone walked into the Sinclair penthouse for her first day of work. Alexander Sinclair was in the entryway, reviewing documents on his phone. The same phone, probably. The same expensive suit. The same everything really, except now there was gray at his temples, and his face had the hard edges of a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted and discovered it wasn't enough. He didn't look up at first, but then he did, and the phone fell from his hands. He recognized her immediately. His face went pale. His jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle working beneath his skin. In that moment, in that single crystalline moment, Simone watched a dozen emotions cross his expression like a storm. Shock, fear, anger, and something darker. Something that looked like guilt mixed with calculation. He knew exactly who she was. Not just the woman standing in his entryway, but what her presence meant. What her reappearance could cost him. And from that moment forward, she could see the wheels turning behind his blue eyes. The threat assessment. The damage control. The decision, already forming, to protect himself at any cost. Even hers. What do you think Alexander realized in that moment? Did he recognize her as the woman he'd abandoned, or did he understand something even more dangerous? Comment below and let me know what you think happens next. The first month was almost normal. Simone cared for Marcus and Noah with professional distance, as if they were any other children in any other home. She cooked their meals. She cleaned their rooms. She made herself indispensable to their daily lives while remaining invisible to their understanding of who she was. It was a careful balance, being present without being seen, helpful without being known. But Alexander couldn't leave it alone. She'd catch him watching her from doorways. He'd find excuses to be in the kitchen when she was cooking, in the hallway when she was organizing, in any space where she occupied the air. And every night, after the penthouse had gone quiet, she'd hear him drift into his study with a drink in his hand. Through the walls, she could almost feel him staring at photographs of the twins, Marcus and Noah frozen in time, his expression unreadable, his silence heavy with calculation. His marriage to Victoria, meanwhile, was imploding in real time. Not with a single catastrophic moment, but with the slow, grinding deterioration of two people who'd stopped trying. The fights started small. Arguments about money. About his late nights at the office. About the coldness that had settled between them like frost on a windowpane, spreading and thickening until there was no warmth left anywhere. Then the fights escalated. One night, Simone heard Victoria's voice rising through the penthouse walls. Not angry. Screaming. A sound so raw and desperate it made her freeze mid-motion, dust cloth still in her hand. Victoria knew. Somehow, she'd seen what was happening. The way Alexander looked at Simone when he thought no one was watching. The subtle shift in his attention. The way a man looks at a woman when old feelings have been reawakened, dangerous and uncontrolled. And Victoria wasn't about to let another woman destroy her marriage. More importantly, she wasn't about to let another woman threaten her access to his fortune. So she did what scorned wives do when they're connected to billions of dollars. She started gathering ammunition. Small things at first. Inconsistencies in household accounts. Transfers she couldn't explain. Questions she'd ask later when the time was right. The papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Divorce papers. Victoria was filing for separation, and she wasn't asking for half of everything. She was demanding more than half. The penthouse. The art collection worth millions. Investment properties. She wanted to strip him bare and leave him bleeding in the business pages of every newspaper in Manhattan. Alexander's lawyers said he could fight it. They always say that. But the optics were terrible, they warned him. If his infidelity came to light, if it became public that he was sleeping with a member of his household staff, it would cost him hundreds of millions in a settlement. It would damage his reputation with clients who valued discretion and propriety. It would destroy him in the circles where he'd built his entire identity. So Alexander made a choice. A choice that would become the cruelest decision of his life, though he wouldn't understand that until much later. He called Simone into his office late one afternoon. The city was turning gold outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline glowing like something precious and fragile. It was beautiful in the way that New York is beautiful when you're rich enough to see it from above. And it was the backdrop to what would become the most devastating moment of Simone's life. She stood in the doorway, not quite entering, sensing danger the way animals sense an approaching storm. He was sitting behind his desk, an expanse of mahogany that cost more than her yearly salary. His expression was carefully neutral. The expression of a man who'd already made his decision and was simply going through the motions of explaining it. He said her name. Just her name. And something in his voice told her that everything was about to change. He told her he knew who she was. Not just the housekeeper who'd been working in his home for the past month, but who she was, where she came from, the night they'd met, the 3 months that had changed her life in ways he probably never knew. He said he knew about the children, that she'd never told him, that she'd carried that secret alone for 7 years while he'd gone about his life, completely unaware. And then he said something else, something that made her stomach drop. He said she'd been stealing from him. Small amounts, he explained, transferred to an account in her name over the past few months. Thousands of dollars. His lawyers, he said, had built an ironclad case. There was documentation, digital trails, the kind of evidence that was impossible to dispute. Simone's mind went blank. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words came out weak and small. She would never do that. He had to know that. This wasn't real. But his expression didn't change. He was already past the point of listening. He told her he was going to give her a choice. She could resign quietly, disappear from the penthouse and disappear from his life. If she did that, he wouldn't press charges. He wouldn't involve the police. She could walk away with her record clean, her freedom intact. Or she could fight it. She could deny the allegations. She could take him to court. And if she did that, he would bury her. His lawyers would bury her. She would go to prison. She would never see her children again. She would spend the rest of her life as a convicted felon, defined by a crime she didn't commit, erased from every meaningful relationship she'd ever built. Simone's world tilted. The room spun. The golden light from the city seemed to mock her with its beauty. She asked him if he understood what he was saying. If he understood what he was accusing her of. If he knew, on some level, that she was innocent. He said he knew a lot of things. What he knew was that she was a complication he couldn't afford. Not anymore. Not with the divorce, the lawyers, the business deals hanging in the balance. She was a complication that threatened to expose him in ways that would cost him everything. So she had to disappear. 48 hours. That's what he gave her. 48 hours to vacate the penthouse and sign the non-disclosure agreement his lawyers had already prepared. 48 hours to remove herself from the lives of 2 children who would grow up never knowing she was their mother. 48 hours to vanish. She packed in silence. Her hands shook as she folded the clothes she'd washed so many times. The same sheets she'd changed, the same surfaces she'd cleaned until they gleamed. She moved through her small room in the servants' quarters like a ghost moving through a world that had already decided she didn't belong there. She tried not to look at the photographs scattered throughout the penthouse. Marcus laughing at breakfast, Noah concentrating on his homework. She tried not to think about what came next. This was it. The end. Not just of a job. Not just of the opportunity she'd seized. The end of everything she'd been building toward. She'd lose her apartment soon without the income. She'd lose her freedom if she went to court and lost. She'd lose her children to a legal system that always sided with the billionaire. The system was designed for people like Alexander Sinclair. It had been built for them. It bent toward their version of reality. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed in the servants' quarters and allowed something to break inside her that had been holding together for 7 years. She cried. Deep, soul-breaking sobs that made her entire body convulse. Her shoulders shook. Her breath came in fragments. She cried for the nurse she'd been, for the woman she'd thought she'd become, for the version of herself that had dared to hope. She cried for 2 children who would grow up thinking she'd abandoned them. She cried because she'd been so careful, so sacrificial. She'd given everything. And it hadn't mattered. Love, it turned out, was worth nothing to men like Alexander Sinclair. It could be erased, forgotten, weaponized. Love was just a complication that needed to disappear. She was so lost in her despair, so consumed by the weight of what was coming, that she almost didn't hear the soft knock on her door. It was Marcus. 7 years old, wearing Spider-Man pajamas, his hair messy from sleep. He'd gotten out of bed. He'd found his way to her room in the darkness. And he was asking her why she was sad. Simone's heart shattered all over again. She told him she was okay. Just tired. Just having a hard day. But Marcus was 7 years old, which meant he was old enough to know when adults were lying. He didn't leave. Instead, he climbed into bed with her and held her hand. He held it the way children hold on to things they understand are slipping away. And that made everything infinitely worse. Because she couldn't comfort him. Because she couldn't promise him that it would be okay. Because in less than 48 hours, she wouldn't be there to hold his hand anymore. Later that night, after Marcus had fallen asleep, Noah came to her door. He looked older than 7. Far older than any child should look. There was something in his face that reminded her of Alexander, not the arrogance, but the intelligence. The ability to see things other people missed. Noah had that gift. And he'd been paying attention. He told her that Marcus had mentioned she was leaving. He asked her why. And Simone couldn't lie to him. She told him that his father needed her to leave. That was all she could say. That was all she could bear to say. Noah's expression hardened in a way that was unsettling. 7 years old and already learning the architecture of adult disappointment. He told her that his father had been in the study all night. Drinking. Speaking on the phone with his mother. Saying things about Simone that weren't kind. Accusing her of things that weren't true. Simone felt something tighten in her chest. But before she could respond, Noah did something unexpected. He reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a tablet. He explained that he and Marcus had found it in their father's study a few weeks ago. Alexander had been using it to record conversations. At first, it seemed like a cool gadget to the boys, something secret and forbidden, something that belonged to the adult world. So they'd kept listening. They discovered that their father recorded a lot of calls. Conversations with his lawyers. Conversations with his wife. Conversations with himself, late at night, when he thought no one could hear. And last night, they'd heard something they knew they should tell Simone. Noah handed her the tablet with the gravity of someone handing over evidence that would change everything. Because that's what it was. Evidence. Proof. The kind of thing that could destroy a man if wielded correctly. She pressed play. And Alexander's voice filled the small room. His own voice, confessing to everything. The frame-up. The false records his lawyers had created. The deliberate destruction of an innocent woman orchestrated by a man with enough power and resources to erase her from existence. He explained it to Victoria with the casual tone of someone discussing weather. He'd set it all up because Simone was a threat. Because her presence in his life, the reappearance of his past, was complicating his future. So he decided to make her disappear. Simone sat in the darkness of her small room, holding a tablet with her own death sentence and her potential salvation on it. The twins, these remarkable, unexpected, innocent children, had recorded their father's confession without understanding what they were recording. They'd handed her the power to destroy him. This single recording could ruin his reputation, end his career, cost him his custody of his own children. It could burn his empire to the ground and leave him standing in the ashes of his own cruelty. She looked at Noah's face and saw Alexander staring back at her. The same sharp eyes. The same intelligence. The same capacity to understand the world in ways that most people couldn't. But she also saw something else. Something that Alexander had lost somewhere along the way. She saw goodness. She saw a child who understood, on some level, that his father had done something wrong and that justice mattered. She saw the best version of what Alexander Sinclair could have been if he'd chosen differently. And she had to make a choice of her own. What would you do if you were Simone? You hold a recording that could expose a billionaire, destroy his career, ruin his reputation. But it would also devastate the 2 children you love. What choice would you make? Comment below and tell me what you would do in this moment. Because this is the question that changes everything. Simone didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small room in the servants' quarters, the tablet glowing in the darkness, replaying Alexander's confession over and over again. His voice, calm and casual as he described orchestrating her destruction. His voice, explaining to his wife how he'd framed an innocent woman because she was inconvenient. Each time she pressed play, the weight on her shoulders grew heavier. 1,000 impossible choices pressing down, and somewhere beneath all of it, a single question that she couldn't escape. What was she going to do with this power? By dawn, she knew. She waited until Marcus and Noah left for school. She watched them climb into their car with their backpacks and their small, trusting faces, and she let herself feel the magnitude of what they'd done. These children, her children, had given her a weapon. But weapons could be used in so many different ways. She waited until Victoria left for her lawyer's office. Then she walked into Alexander's study, tablet in hand, and closed the door quietly behind her. He was nursing a scotch at 8 in the morning. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His face was unshaven. The man who'd orchestrated empires, who'd moved through the world with the confidence of someone untouchable, looked broken. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his expression so quickly she almost missed it. Fear. He said something about being done here, about arrangements he'd already made. But his voice had lost its edge. It had lost its certainty. Simone told him very quietly that she'd heard his confession. She told him that his sons had recorded him. Everything he'd said to Victoria. Everything about how he'd framed her. Everything about why he wanted to destroy her. His entire body went rigid. She watched the color drain from his face. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor, and he demanded that she give him the tablet. His voice turned vicious. He threatened to sue her. He threatened to press charges against her for theft of private property. He said he would make sure she never worked in the city again. He reminded her of the resources at his disposal, as if reminding her of his power would somehow diminish hers in that moment. But Simone didn't flinch. She'd already lost everything. There was nothing left to take from her. The tablet was just metal and glass. His threats were just sounds. She told him she wasn't there to blackmail him. She wasn't there to destroy him. She was there to tell him the truth. And the truth, she said, was that his sons loved him despite what he was. They were willing to protect him. But she wouldn't. Alexander's expression crumbled. It was like watching a building collapse from the inside out. He asked her what she wanted. His voice was so small, so human, so different from the man who'd threatened to send her to prison just days before. She told him exactly what she wanted. She wanted him to walk into the police station and confess to everything. The frame-up, the false evidence, the deliberate destruction of an innocent woman's life. She wanted him to withdraw all charges against her. And she wanted child support. Full, retroactive child support for Marcus and Noah. From the day they were born. He looked like he was about to argue. But then something shifted in his eyes. A moment of clarity. A moment where he finally, truly understood the magnitude of what he'd done. What he'd almost done. What his own children had stopped him from doing. He whispered something. A question. He asked if the boys were his. If that's what all of this meant. If that's what he'd been too blind and too selfish to see all along. Simone met his gaze. She told him yes. They were his. And they deserved better than what he'd shown them. But more importantly, they deserved the truth. Truth, she said, was the only currency that mattered anymore. The next 72 hours would become the most significant legal reversal in New York's financial circles. Not because it was unusual for a billionaire to confess. But because Alexander Sinclair confessed completely. Totally. Without reservation. He walked into the Manhattan District Attorney's office on Thursday morning. His lawyers tried to stop him. His publicists begged him to reconsider. His board members called him with threats and warnings. He walked forward anyway. He confessed to everything. The frame-up. The false evidence his lawyers had created. The deliberate destruction of an innocent woman. He answered every question. He provided every document. He didn't spin it. He didn't minimize it. He simply told the truth. The charges against Simone were dropped immediately. The false evidence was exposed and traced back to Alexander's own team. In the eyes of the law, she was exonerated. In the eyes of the court, she was innocent. And suddenly, she existed again. The woman everyone had forgotten. The quiet nurse who'd been sacrificed by a billionaire protecting his reputation, was suddenly visible again. But the bigger story came the next evening. Every major news outlet in the country broke the same headline at almost the same moment. It spread like wildfire through the networks and the internet and the dinner conversations of millions of people who'd never heard of Simone Hayes before this moment. Billionaire Alexander Sinclair announces he is father to 7-year-old twins. Admits to framing their mother. The business world went into chaos. Clients abandoned him within hours. His board demanded his resignation. Victoria's lawyers, sensing a man in freefall, pivoted their entire strategy. Instead of fighting, they simply waited to see how far down he would fall. But Alexander did something unexpected. He didn't fight back. He didn't hire a crisis management team to spin the narrative into something palatable. He didn't disappear into damage control. He simply owned it. All of it. He gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal. He sat across from a journalist in a simple room with no backdrop, no professional lighting, just a man and the truth he'd been running from for 7 years. He told the entire story. He told it about the night he met Simone in a hospital emergency room. He told it about the 3 months of happiness he'd thrown away because it didn't fit into the life he thought he was supposed to have. He told it about the moment she walked back into his penthouse and he realized what he'd become. A man so afraid of losing his power that he was willing to destroy someone he'd once loved. He cried while telling it. Real tears. The kind that come from a place deeper than performance or strategy. He said he'd destroyed an innocent woman because he was afraid. He was afraid that loving her would cost him his empire. He was afraid that his past would define his future. And in being afraid, he'd become exactly the kind of man he never wanted to be. He looked directly at the camera, and he apologized. Not to the media. Not to his board. To Simone. He said he owed her an apology that would take the rest of his life to earn. And to Marcus and Noah, he said he was sorry. Sorry that he'd almost cost them their mother. Sorry that it had taken him this long to see what was right in front of him. Simone moved into a modest house in Westchester. Not the penthouse. Not one of the mansions scattered throughout the city and the Hamptons. A simple 3-bedroom house where Marcus and Noah could have their own rooms. Where she could walk through rooms without echoes following her. Where she could finally breathe. Alexander paid the child support retroactively. Every dollar owed from the day the twins were born. He also paid for Marcus's braces. For Noah's tutoring. And for Simone's college tuition. She was finishing her nursing degree, the dream she'd had to set aside when she discovered she was pregnant with twins. The dream she'd never stopped thinking about, even through all those years of sacrifice. But the money wasn't the important part. It was never really about the money. The important part was that Marcus and Noah finally knew the truth. Simone was their mother. She'd never abandoned them. She'd carried them alone for 7 years, working minimum wage jobs, fighting every single day, because she loved them more than she loved her own freedom. More than she loved the life she might have had. More than she loved anything. That first Sunday when they spent the day together, really together, not as employer and employee, but as a real family, they went to a park. They walked along the water. And Marcus asked her a question that would stay with her forever. He asked if she was happy now. Simone looked at her beautiful sons, and she allowed herself to smile for the first time in 7 years. Not the professional smile she'd worn while cleaning penthouse floors. Not the guarded smile she'd learned to hide behind. A real smile. One that reached her eyes and came from somewhere deep inside her chest, from a place that had finally healed. She told him yes. She was happy now. That night, she called Alexander. Not to forgive him. Forgiveness would take time. It would require work and many more conversations and the passage of years. But to tell him that his sons needed their father. Not the billionaire version. Not the version that had tried to destroy her. But the real version. The man who was finally honest about who he was and what he'd done. Alexander promised her he would be better. For them. For her. For himself. He said it with a kind of conviction that comes from understanding, finally and completely, the cost of his own arrogance. Simone believed him. Not because he was a billionaire who could buy redemption with enough money, but because their children had forced him to see the price of his own choices. They'd given him a mirror, and he'd finally looked into it. And sometimes, that's all it takes. A moment of clarity. A child's courage. A chance to be better. And sometimes, that's the beginning of healing. The story of Simone Hayes and Alexander Sinclair is not a fairy tale. It's not a love story with a neat bow at the end. It's not a story where everyone rides off into the sunset and lives happily ever after, the way we've been taught to expect. It's a story about what happens when secrets collide with innocence. When power meets love. When the choices we make to protect ourselves end up destroying everything we're trying to keep. It's a story about a woman who had to lose everything, her job, her reputation, her privacy, in order to gain the one thing she'd always wanted. The truth. The truth that she'd never been invisible. The truth that her children saw her as their hero. The truth that love, real love, is infinitely stronger than money or status or billionaire pride. And it's a story about a man who had to lose his empire, not legally, but spiritually. Who had to understand that some things can't be bought or controlled. Some things can't be erased, no matter how many lawyers you hire. Some things demand honesty. Some things demand sacrifice. Some things demand the courage to admit you were wrong. Their sons gave them both a gift that night in a penthouse apartment. They gave them a chance to be better. They gave them the truth. Whether they take that chance, whether they build something real from the ashes of what was destroyed, is still being written. That story belongs to them now. Your children are watching. Always remember that. They see the versions of yourself you think are hidden. They record not just what you say, but who you are. And they will always, always choose truth over money. Always. Simone's silence was her strength. For 7 years, she carried a secret that could have destroyed a man. But ultimately, it was the children's courage to speak, the innocence of 2 7-year-olds who didn't understand they were changing everything, that set them all free. Thank you for being here for this entire journey. Thank you for typing present in the comments. Thank you for believing that people should be treated fairly. Thank you for caring about stories like this one. If you loved this story, if it moved you or challenged you or made you think about the choices we make and the power we wield, please hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments what you thought of how Simone handled that recording. Should she have done anything differently? What would you have done in her position? And I have one final question for you. What do you think happens 5 years from now? Do Marcus and Noah have a real relationship with their father? Not just child support and obligatory visits, but real connection? Does Simone eventually find love again? Real, uncomplicated love with someone who sees her completely? Does Alexander continue on his path of redemption, or does he slip back into old patterns? Comment your theories below. I want to hear what you think the future holds for them. I'll see you in the next story.